crisis. We are faced with a meaning crisis, according to John Vervaeke. And I think, in all reality, we would have to say he was right, and he is right. And we are facing a meaning crisis in our younger population. Many people have increased loneliness, increased depression, anxiety, especially among the younger generation, and even affluent, areas. That this is not just isolated to, um, poor areas or rich areas, or it's really everywhere. And so what John argues, and he's written extensively on the meaning crisis topic, and he defines the meaning crisis as a widespread sense of disorientation and disconnection from the world, which is characterized by a feeling of emptiness, confusion, and uncertainty. And Vervaeke argues that the meaning crisis is a result of the fact that our traditional sources of meaning, such as religion and traditional values, are no longer providing us with a sense of purpose and direction. And so human beings need to feel very connected, according to John, and connected to their environment. And the issue is that the same tools that we use to feel connected with each other are also the tools that bring us into this crisis in the first place, into a self-deception. And when I try to, I'm going to try to explain sort of what is John trying to get to, and is he fully getting there, or is there sort of an abstraction at play, that he's not fully able to grasp the what is behind the phenomena of the world. And he argues that we have a capacity for meaning making, which is closely tied to our ability to create and use language, and it allows us to create complex social structures and cultures. He also notes that our brain has a tendency to habituate to familiar stimuli, including the sources of meaning that we've created for ourselves. He talks about, he's a cognitive scientist. And I think that I want to say what he's trying to get at is fundamentally the problem and the issue. I do believe that his work has gotten us to a point. And the question is, where do we go from here now that we know we have a meaning crisis? Because a growing part of the population, according to John, is seeing themselves as spiritual, but not religious. And at the same time, traditional religions are also growing in size. So we have spirituality growing and religions growing, which is also spirituality, of course. It's just a different way to do it. But then at the same time, we also have increase in loneliness, depression, anxiety, and addiction, and all of these things, right? We also have an increase in psychedelic use, and people don't really know any other way to have a spiritual experience. And they come out of that experience and they don't really have any concepts of what they saw. And this can lead to an ego inflation where you sort of collapse into yourself. You become a mystic. You might believe that you're God, that you're God, and you have this sort of high view of yourself compared to others. And this can happen. It can happen on the spiritual path as well. But there's a grounding in the spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner and Anthroposophy that I believe is the ultimate answer to the meaning crisis. The issue is, how do we actually get people who can hear what John is saying into anthroposophy? Not in a forceful way, of course, or anything like that, or in a malicious way, of course, but in a way that sees anthroposophy as a way to live in the modern era. Um, because I think a lot of times when we're listening to people talk about consciousness and spirituality, and they're talking about science, how do we combine the two? There is this kind of grinding of the two. They say, John says, even he says, there's the scientific view that doesn't have the spiritual, and then there's the spiritual view that doesn't have the scientific. And these are two forces or tendencies that can pull us in those two directions of materialism, which is the scientific view only, and then of spiritualism, which is the spiritual view only, right? And I think the issue is that when you hear the words esoteric, occult, and also when you look into those things, it may just be too much, and people can't handle it. They don't want to completely change their lives. Um, and I think the issue is eventually we will have to come to a full consciousness of our spirituality in our soul. That's something that John, as far as I've listened to, has avoided talking about the soul, um, talking about, specifics, right? Because consciousness is very broad term. And with Steiner and with spiritual science, he was very specific about what are the beings that are involved, where are, the diversity of spiritual beings, not just a universal consciousness. And I think that John understands that on multiple levels. He's saying, yes, there is a one, but there's also multiple levels that we can be on at the same time. Um, I think John, though, he has a saying, he calls it conspirituality, which is like conspiracies bound up with spirituality. I think there's a potential that the esotericism and the occult falls into that category for him. Um, I think he's really talking about the New Age movement. He's criticized aspects of that in his work in terms of the manifestation of our desires through positive thinking. I completely agree with John on this. I think that there is this tendency towards that we have seen really massively with the Gaia movement. It's a New Age movement, right? That's kind of the New Age movement. It's a very spiritualistic sort of manifestation type of thing, but you're really manifesting at that point these sort of mystical desires of your ego rather than seeing the world as yourself and you as the world. At that point, you're really, really feeling that self within yourself and seeing the world as sort of other from you. Um, and you kind of get shut up within yourself in that sense. So I agree with John, and he's talked about that as well. Um, but he believes that a lot of this has to do with politicizing, distrust, being anti-science. I also agree there. I think we have to have a science. We have to have a strong scientific foundation of our culture. And, we've probably fallen too deep into science, but at the same time, we can't be anti-science. We have to find a middle ground between the spiritual and the science, which I again believe is anthroposophy, somewhat theosophy, but theosophy can tend towards the New Age and the spiritualism. So what Steiner tried to do is he tried to combine these two things. And I think when we get to the crux of the matter, um, the issue is that we are supposed to just believe that this one person was sent from God a message, a revelation, if you will, that is supposed to save all of humanity. You know, and um, the issue is how can you actually get yourself to that point of believing that? Um, how can you sort of let go of everything that you've known and everything you've been taught? Because we've gone so far down this path, and Steiner gives us a completely different view of things and a completely different path, where we're talking about different history, right? Different, a different view of things, a spiritual evolution rather than just the human Darwinistic evolution. But Steiner gives so much credit to Darwin in his work. People don't realize how much credit he's given him and how much he believes that it actually comes from reincarnation and how much it comes from a Christian view of the world, because Darwin was a Christian. And so Steiner recognizes that, but um, he recognized that it also got caught up in the scientific revolution. Um, and so without a concept of reincarnation, without a concept of karma, without a concept of our being, being a physical body, an etheric body, an astral body, and an ego or spirit, or you could say a physical body, a body of life forces, a soul, and a spirit. If we don't have these conceptions, we can't really have these conversations. And I think that that's part of the issue I have with John's not going far enough. We're sort of on the surface constantly, right? Just kind of on the surface. Um, and I think that what he's done a great job of is defining these surface level issues that we have. What he says is, um, what we need is transformative rituals and a cultivation of wisdom and a value of ecology of practice and a value of wise modelers, um, to get to that meaning. That's basically um, his view of what would happen if we, cultivated the things that he discusses. Those are the things he sort of mentioned in that light. So, um, he also has said it involves cultivating a deeper sense of awareness. He talks about connection a lot and purpose in life, gratitude, appreciation, and wonder for the world around us. Those things are all great. They are all necessary. I completely agree with John on these. The issue is, does this just scratch the surface? And I think that John would say, yes, I think it probably does. I don't think he would claim, to have all the answers, right? That's kind of why he's out there putting this message out there to try to get people thinking about what could the answers be. And I'm just worried that there's too much of a stigma behind the metaphysical realities, or esoteric Christianity realities that people like Steiner has put out. You could look at people like Matt Siegel, who runs a channel, um, that really discusses a lot of these things, that John discusses, a lot of philosophy. Um, you know, I think his channel is called Footnotes to Plato. He also has a channel called Phenomenon. Um, and so, he talks about Steiner on his channels a lot, and he has groups that he meets with. Um, I've been a part of the latest group a little bit, where we talk about different books from Steiner, and Matt Siegel has a dialogue with John Vervaeke. So there's a connection that is forming, and maybe eventually it can be made. Maybe eventually it can be made. Maybe if you start with John with the meaning crisis and then you go and you move through. The only issue is I don't love that. Well, the issue is can you move, like, what is the order of operations to move from where John has guided you in the initial stages. And I think I like that what I've seen so far, and I may be wrong, that he's not pointing totally in any direction for you to go. Um, this is something that I hope that I can emulate. And I don't think that I do a great job of it because I have such a strong viewpoint of spiritual science being the right direction. Um, so it's really hard for me to not sort of glob on or to, grip tightly on my views. And it's something, but I just think when you read Rudolf Steiner, you realize that there is the capability to see beyond just the sense world and the physical world. We all have that capability, every single one of us, and we're on track to get there. And actually, as we evolve through incarnations, we will get there. We will have clairvoyance. We will be able to interact with the spiritual world directly. And so it's just a matter of time. And there will only be a small number, probably, of people who dive fully into spiritual science. And you have to, in my opinion, go through a lot of pain to get to that point. I know I've been through a lot of pain and you could say suffering. Um, and I think that that's kind of what you need to be able to give everything up to then come back to something that's rational and logical and also scientific and also has a spiritual moral sense that you can feel, but you can think it through logically, but you can also feel the truth that's involved. And another thing that John says is there's a rise in stoicism and mindfulness. He sees this as a positive, people taking, responsibility. And I agree, like, if you go down a spiritual path, you have to make sure you're taking responsibility in your life and you're getting out into the world and you're trying to do good things and you're making a living and you're doing things like that. It's really important. Um, and so, he does mention a few things about stoicism as well as mindfulness. I think basically what he would say is that is going backwards in our evolution. Um, and so, and he also explains we're at a turning point, John Vervaeke. He says we are at a turning point. And I think that I also agree that we really are. I mean, if we have a meaning crisis and we don't have a direction, and then we have artificial intelligence that's coming, that's going to take 30% of the workforce's jobs by 2030. Where are all these young people supposed to go? What are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to study? And I think that what I would say is that I've gone down all those rabbit holes, and where they all lead to is spiritual science. You will never get the satisfaction that you need, in my opinion, through just doing mindfulness practices, through just having a stoic viewpoint of yourself and of the world. Um, we need more in our time. We really do. And it's a healing force that comes from spiritual science and anthroposophy. It is something that can heal you just by reading through it and studying it and understanding it. Um, and I think that, I mean, what if, like, let's say the Gospel of John, right? Gospel of John, or the revelations that came through the Gospels, right? What's to say that those people were not also clairvoyant, which they obviously were, because they were able to see, the revelation, right? The revelations. You have the Apocalypse of John. So you have this, and, you know, I guess what if Steiner was the next revelation that we needed for our time? And I believe that he was. Um, I truly believe that he was. And, you know, through his incarnations, he worked to get to the point where he was able to have this much of a significant revelation and impact on the world. And he not only did it through these things, he created a school, Waldorf's education, which is successful across the world. He created a biodynamic farming movement, which is successful across the world. He created eurythmy, which is a type of dance, and art, which is successful across the world. Um, you know, he did so many things. And that's just naming a few things. Um, but it's still not understood strongly enough. And so if we are at a turning point and we do have a meaning crisis, I do believe that spiritual science and anthroposophy is the answer to that meaning crisis. It's only a matter of time. Is this the incarnation that you come to an understanding, or come to a devotional understanding of what really was given by Rudolf Steiner in the early 1900s? Is it something that is meaningful enough to you that you can dedicate your life to that, um, which can give you meaning? And um, and yeah, that's why I think it's the answer. I hope that what I said doesn't come off as being critical of John. I think he's done a great job of covering, what these issues are and really what we need in the world. And I think he does a good job of balancing between the science and the spiritual. And I think he's right on the track to get eventually to spiritual science. The only thing is, you know, is this the time for you or him to come to anthroposophy? And if it's not, then that's okay. Um, in a way, it's meant to be in some senses. Um, and eventually we will all get there. And we will know anthroposophy without having any of the texts that Steiner gave in the future. We will have a direct experience of Christ. We will have a direct experience of what he gave to us. And many people won't even remember. And so it means a lot that you are watching this now. And if you are, I hope that you got something out of this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and have a great rest.